I just had the most meaningful conversation with a good friend of mine. We were discussing our respective work. She also does a lot of diaspora engagement, and something became really clear. We are halfway through 2024. There has just been a sort of snowball effect on different things happening around the world. Gaza, Sudan, the United States, the protests here at the universities. It's an election year here in the US. Haiti, Ethiopia, with the conflict in the north. South Africa and the elections it just had. There's a lot of people that just are feeling the weight of the monumentous weight. But I'm really wanting to call attention to the experience of diasporas, and particularly diaspora burnout. Diaspora burnout is not unique. When diaspora burnout happens, I have to tell you that it's probably the most severe form of burnout one can experience, having had it myself more than once. I'm talking about the kind of burnout that happens when there's conflict and crisis in either your homeland or in a region you feel connected to that you don't live in. And watching a humanitarian crisis unfold from afar, the way it hits communities that are still connected to the homeland. And I'm not just talking about immigrants and people who remember the homeland, but people who are children of the immigrants, people who are descendants of migrants, looking at this homeland or feeling a connection to it, and then watching the suffering is so profoundly painful because you're forced to be an observer to suffering that you may not feel you can help solve and end. That there's another level of burnout, which happens when you're a diaspora member trying to respond to the suffering by humanitarian response, right? By sending money, by doing advocacy, by organizing, by literally going to the region, doing medical missions. We know a lot of diasporas do that. But the burnout that happens during humanitarian crisis when diasporas get involved as first responders, as donors, as affected citizens and residents and descendants, you start personalizing it. You can name names of people you've lost. You can list cities and villages, the countries. You remember the last time you visited that city. Now, look, a lot of people visit our homelands, right? The world is open. You can go to different countries. But when you look at your homeland as a place that you always want to go back to or a place that you will always have connection with, watching the destruction and the suffering hits you as if it's happening to you and your loved one, right? When you start to respond, you're using your time, talent, and treasure. You know, I talk often about how are you going to apply your time, talent, and treasure for good. And this is where I encourage diasporas to think of how they can leverage their skills and what ideas they can come with, right? Start a business, start an organization, be a member of an organization, be a member of a community, volunteer, donate, advocate, write a letter, write an op-ed. All these different small scale examples collectively end up driving change, right? Positive impact. But when the crisis hits in such a way that it feels protracted, it feels never ending, it feels reoccurring, it feels beyond the reach of what you and your community and your whole community can do, it is almost debilitating. It's almost like you hit an emotional paralysis, an overwhelming level of grief and pain and suffering. I'm putting these names out there because I want us to acknowledge the kind of psychological, emotional harm and suffering that we go through in the diaspora is nowhere near in comparison, obviously, to victims and communities on the ground. But the burden of feeling connected to a problem and not being able to solve it, and then being in a place, in a country or in a region or part of the world where you presumably have resources and you presumably have governments and systems that are there for you, right? And to find out that those governments and systems are not responding to you, they're not agreeing, they're not in alignment with you, you feel another level of helplessness. But the call I had today was with someone who is third level, where they're directly affected, they're responding, and they are at the table, they're designing the innovative pathways for diaspora impact, and they have the responsibility of leading so many people behind them. And I got to tell you, the type of sacrifice and the type of commitment that diaspora leaders and community members are making at all levels is profound. And what I want is to remind you, when you're in a diaspora space, don't ignore that burnout. It is a suffering of its own kind that requires its own care. And it is not the same or even comparable to what's happening in your homeland or in another part of the world. But it is worthy of you taking the time to name it, to acknowledge it, and to let it heal. Because many of the crises we are all engulfed with, finding ourselves connected to or responding to, show no signs of abating. And this is from someone who's worked in policy and advocacy and on U.S. Africa policy and U.S. Middle East policy for years. Every single crisis I've named, I would add Congo, of course, the DRC. These crises are not new, and they have happened again and again. And so for diaspora burnout, when we feel overwhelmed by grief, by suffering, by pain, by sadness, there's a period of rest and healing, and you have to withdraw. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there will be someone else, or there are other ways to make impact. Okay, there will be someone else who can carry it with you. There will be other spaces for you. But I'm particularly struck at the burden and the weight of responsibility that Black and brown diasporas in particular shoulder every day, with or without a crisis, and then when crises hit. The Palestinian diaspora is not new to this, and we know the Palestinian diaspora has been heavily active in carrying the burden of responsibility of advocating for the rights of Palestinians. But the last 8 months have probably exacerbated that weight and made it even heavier. And then you add the rest of us in who feel the same calling to speak out for the rights of Palestinians, that grief that you have, the grief that I have. You have to be able to retreat and heal and allow yourself to grieve in a way that helps you continue doing what you do, okay? I'm saying this because not every diaspora member has the bandwidth, capacity, or ability to always be on the front lines or to even just be in the response form. And that's because you have to know when to step back. And I think that there's an unfair expectation that we put on ourselves as members of diasporas and that we put on others, that they should always show up and use their time, talent, and treasure publicly. I know you're doing the best that you can. And I know that you are trying to think all the different ways you can be a good member in your family, in your community, in your organization, in your cause. I know that you are sitting here trying to heal. And I just want you to remember that you deserve the space and time to address your own pains and griefs, because the kind of work we have to do on behalf of our people, all of our people, whether it's your homeland, whether it's your country, whether it's your community as you define it, it's never ending. And if you are sitting in the United States or in the West and you feel like I should be running 24/7, you can't. And you especially can't if you are trying to pick up the mantle in responding to crises. And you especially can't if you are trying to clear a brand new pathway for so many. Okay? This is a reminder to give yourself grace. And this is a reminder that your psyche, your wellness, deserves the same amount of attention, if more. Because I'm very sad to say this, but we're going to be needed for our country in different moments of crisis and growth, of hardship and of prosperity, of policy issues, of leadership changes, whatever it is that's happening in our homeland, both here where you live and there, right? Your ancestral homeland and your adopted homeland. You can't give yourself to two regions or two countries or two ecosystems or multiple ecosystems all the time. You can't. It's just not psychologically, you know, mentally, it's just not good for you. And if you are a brown or black person who has been suffering under systems of white supremacy in the West, or the vestiges of colonialism and slavery wherever you are in this world, and if you have been navigating this world just as you are, that's already a responsibility and a weight, okay? Your life is just complicated as it is. This immense privilege because you're growing up better than where you could have been growing up if you were in a country where it's underdeveloped or the economy is less developed. Or there's poverty, instability. Say what you want about the guilt you have of where you live. But that doesn't mean that you should keep going until you literally burn out and we lose you in some way or another. We lose you by cynicism. We lose you by exhaustion. We lose you by bad health. We lose you by mental illness. We lose you by poverty. We lose you by fractured relationships. We lose you by the disillusionment of what you thought you could do. We lose you by the romanticism of what you're doing. Do not get lost in this grand calling that you have as members of diasporas, because we all have it at some point. But then when you stop and pause and look at your bank account, your health records, your family relationships, your own physical health charts over the years, you look at the way that you've grown or shrunk, there's something more important that needs attention, and that's you. And that's you from where you are right now. Someone said in the present, and that's absolutely right. You deserve the time and space to rest, to heal, to discover, to sleep. You deserve the time and space to not be on the internet all the time following your country. And that's hard to say, especially with socials the way they are, right? I'm on doom scrolling all day. Diaspora doom scrolling is the worst. And you do it. We all do it. And the thing about diaspora doom scrolling is I'm reading the same type of news that I read 20 years ago. On Sudan, I was reading this in 2006. On Congo, I was reading this in 2007. Except it didn't come to me like this on my timeline. Okay? It was on internet pages that I had to look for. It was through mailing lists that I had to be subscribed to. Now, I'm not saying that access to information needs to be difficult, but I'm saying the nature of consumption of news or information about our homelands. For those of you that want to respond, that want to help, it is so good to be informed. But the key to moderating that is taking time to take care of yourself. Now, the phone call that I had that has inspired this call or this little message is because I love this person dearly. And the most incredible person, there are so many people like this that are just phenomenal leaders. And what they said was very good. They're taking a 3-month sabbatical. Not really like I'm disappearing, but like I got to pause. I got to straight up pause and I got to recalibrate. And I would invite you all to think about that. What does diaspora burnout look like for you? How do you safeguard yourself from burnout? And how do you see yourself continuing to exist in a world that feels like you have to respond to everything? But truthfully, we know, and I hope you know even more now, that this isn't going to be in the best interest of your own wellness and your community's wellness and our people's wellness, right? That tightrope of the diaspora's expectations that you have on yourself and that others have on you to do it this way, it's a muscle that you're going to need to develop to ignore other people's expectations, ignore your expectations. Work through those feelings of guilt, of responsibility, of the humanitarian need to respond will always be there and you will always be doing it. But do it from a place that also allows you wellness. And guess what? Burnout isn't unique to diaspora's people, okay? I have seen, and my colleagues and friends have gone through humanitarian burnout in the humanitarian sector. I left the humanitarian sector because I hit diaspora burnout, and I hit diaspora burnout in 2012. I hit it when Somalia and 8 other countries were experiencing a famine that hit 60 million people from Somalia all the way down to Uganda. Famine in Somalia, severe drought in the other countries. Millions and millions of people displaced. Organized massive diaspora fundraising, worked with colleagues, diaspora friends, did all of that. But then I found myself at my cousin's wedding getting ready for day 2 of the wedding, because we do multiple days. And I was crying in the hotel room, doubting humanitarian statistics about Somalia, because my heart was so invested, rightly, understandably. And I lost the presence and the sound mind of what was happening at a wedding. So when you do humanitarian work, or when you do advocacy, when you take up causes that are related to conflict, to disasters, and when you are a member of a diaspora, you have to be very diligent and mindful of how you do it well and still protect your own wellness. I commend my friend for knowing that the only way for me to continue in this marathon is to pause. And this is on crises that feel very urgent and that are very urgent. There are going to be people with different tolerance levels. I'm just asking you to gauge your tolerance.